As winter's icy grip tightened over medieval Europe, the world transformed into a frozen, unforgiving landscape. Picture yourself in a small village, where frost crackles beneath your boots and your breath clouds in the biting air. Icicles gleam like daggers from the eaves of wattle-and-daub huts, and a heavy blanket of snow smothers the countryside. For most people in this era, winter wasn't a season of cozy fires and festive cheer. It was a relentless battle for survival, marked by cold, hunger, and the constant threat of death. Tonight, dear listener, let's journey back to those harsh medieval winters, where the elements tested the resilience of every soul, from peasant to king. Whether you're tucked under warm blankets or simply seeking a calm escape into history, I'm delighted you're here. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to connect with fellow history lovers. And if these soothing tales of the past resonate with you, consider subscribing for more. Now, let's leave the modern world behind and step into a time when winter's arrival brought not just discomfort, but genuine fear. Imagine the medieval countryside. Bare trees stand stark against a pale sky, their branches heavy with snow. The weak sun offers little warmth, and the wind carries flurries that sting the face. For the people of this time, winter meant hardship on a scale we can scarcely fathom. Without central heating or insulated homes, the cold seeped into every corner of life, lingering for months. Rivers froze into glassy sheets. Fields lay barren under snow, and the promise of warmth was a luxury few could afford. But it wasn't always so dire. Earlier medieval winters followed a more predictable rhythm, met with stoic acceptance. Then, starting in the 14th century, the climate shifted, ushering in the Little Ice Age, a period of colder temperatures and harsher winters that stretched into the 19th century. Its causes remain debated, but its effects were undeniable. Failed crops, dying livestock, and biting winds that spared no one. The Great Frost of 1709 stands as a stark example of this era's brutality. Temperatures plummeted, freezing rivers and lakes solid. In London, the Thames became a frozen highway, where people set up shops and lit fires on the ice, a surreal sight that masked a grim reality. Many perished that year, unable to escape the cold's deadly embrace. Yet, even in such bleak times, moments of unexpected inspiration emerged. During this frost, a young Isaac Newton, then a student at Cambridge, was sent home to his family's farm. By the flickering light of the hearth, with the world outside locked in ice, he began pondering ideas that would shape his revolutionary theories on calculus and optics. It's a reminder that even the darkest winters could spark brilliance in the human mind. For most, however, winter was a season to endure, not to romanticize. The wealthy could afford thick woolen cloaks, roaring fires, and stock larders to weather the lean months. But for the peasants and serfs, the backbone of medieval society, life was far grimmer. Picture waking in a one-room cottage, the air thick with smoke from a feeble fire. Your breath mist as you rise from a straw mattress. Careful not to wake your family, huddled together for warmth. The cold creeps through every crack, numbing fingers and toes until they ache. Breakfast, if you're fortunate, is a thin bowl of porridge or a crust of stale bread. The harvest bounty is dwindling, and the specter of starvation looms. Livestock fare no better, their coats matted with frost as they shiver in the barn. Gathering firewood is grueling work, your hands raw and chapped, but without it, your family won't survive a night. Driven by thoughts of your children's pinched, hungry faces, you press on. This was a reality for countless medieval people, a ceaseless struggle against the elements, where survival demanded every ounce of strength. Yet, amidst the hardship, there were glimmers of resilience and even joy. The medieval world was deeply attuned to nature's rhythms, and winter brought not only suffering but also rituals and celebrations that offered hope. One such tradition was the Feast of St. Stephen, held on December 26th. For one day, the rigid feudal hierarchy was upended as a peasant or serf was crowned a lord of misrule, presiding over a boisterous celebration of food, drink, and revelry. This rare moment of indulgence broke the monotony of winter's austerity, as villagers laughed, danced, and momentarily forgot their struggles. Greetings, weary traveler, and welcome to this tranquil nook of history. Before we embark on our journey back to the harsh winters of medieval times, I want to warmly greet you, dear listener. Whether you are tucked under your blankets, ready to drift into sleep, or simply seeking to relax with some gentle historical storytelling, I'm delighted you've joined me tonight. If you don't mind sharing, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Feel free to leave a comment. I always enjoy seeing the diverse community of history lovers gathered here. If you appreciate this calm, immersive style of tales from the past, please subscribe so you won't miss future episodes. But for now, let's let the stresses of the day fade away as we travel back to a time long ago when winter's icy grip was far more perilous than we can imagine today. A time when the changing seasons brought not just inconvenience, but genuine fear for survival. Imagine yourself in the medieval European countryside. The last leaves have long since fallen, and the sun hangs low on the horizon, its weak rays barely warming the biting chill. Frost crunches beneath your feet as a breeze carries the first snowflakes. Winter is approaching, and for the people of that era, it meant one thing above all: hardship. The cold creeps in slowly at first, but will linger for many months. The landscape soon becomes blanketed in white. Rivers and ponds freeze into gleaming sheets of ice. In an age before central heating and insulated homes, warmth was a distant dream for all but the wealthiest. However, it wasn't always so brutal. There was a time when seasons followed a more predictable rhythm, and snow's arrival was met with acceptance rather than dread. Then the climate shifted, ushering in the period known as the Little Ice Age, lasting from the 14th century into the 19th. This era brought colder temperatures and harsher winters than anyone remembered. The causes remain not fully understood, but its impact was widespread. Crops failed, livestock died, and icy winds blew harder. One famous example was the Great Frost of 1709, when temperatures plunged so low that rivers and lakes froze solid. In London, the Thames became a frozen highway where people set up shops and lit fires on the ice, a surreal sight that came at a deadly cost. Many perished, huddled inside as the world outside turned to ice. Amid the suffering, some found strange solace in the cold. Isaac Newton, then a student at Cambridge, was forced home to his family farm during the Great Frost. There by the fire, he had time to ponder the universe's mysteries, beginning work on groundbreaking ideas in calculus and optics. Who knows how many great minds were sparked by the quiet isolation of a long, cold winter. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, the human spirit seeks light. For most medieval people, though, winter was endured rather than enjoyed. The rich could afford thick woolens, ample firewood, and well-stocked larders. But peasants and serfs, who made up the majority, faced a very different reality. Imagine waking in a one-room cottage, the air thick with smoke from a sputtering fire. Your breath misses as you rise from a straw mattress, careful not to disturb your shivering family huddle for warmth. Cold seeps through every crack, numbing fingers and toes. Breakfast, if any, might be a meager bowl of porridge or stale bread. Food from the last harvest is running low, and the long winter months promise more scarcity. Livestock suffer too, their coats matted with frost as they huddle in barns, breath steaming in the icy air. As the day wears on, you trudge through snow to gather firewood, backbreaking work that leaves your hands raw and chapped. Without fire, your family won't survive the night. You think of your children, their small faces pinched with hunger and cold, and press on. This was a reality for many in medieval times. A constant battle against the elements, a fight for survival consuming every waking hour. Yet even amid hardship, moments of resilience and joy existed. The medieval world was deeply attuned to nature's rhythms. Seasonal changes were marked not only by weather but by rich rituals and celebrations. Even in winter's depths, glimmers of light appeared. One such beacon was the midwinter feast of St. Stephen, held annually on December 26. For a brief moment, social hierarchies were inverted. A peasant or serf was crowned lord of misrule for the day, presiding over raucous celebrations filled with food, drink, and revelry, a rare indulgence in an austere existence. Perhaps the most enduring symbol of hope was the simple act of coming together. Survival often depended on community strength, making bonds of family and friendship profoundly important. Picture a small village huddled against snow, chimney smoke mingling with the leaden sky, a sign of life amid barrenness. Inside, families crowd around hearths, sharing stories and meager food. Neighbors trudge through snow to check on each other, bringing firewood or stew. Faces lined with weariness also show quiet determination. They survived past winters and will survive this one. The long, cold months march on, snow piling higher, ice thickening. Yet even in winter's darkest depths, hope glimmers. Medieval people knew no matter how brutal the season, spring would come again. They watched for signs, lengthening days, softening earth beneath snow. When spring arrived, it was celebrated with joy and reverence. Plow Monday marked winter's official end, a day when fieldwork resumed. Plows blessed in elaborate ceremonies, symbolizing life's renewal. As first furrows cut the earth, relief and gratitude filled the air. This resilience is hard to fathom in our modern age of convenience. Facing such relentless hardship yearly is almost unimaginable. Yet our ancestors met their harsh world with remarkable strength and fortitude. They found hope in darkness and joy in simplicity, leaving a legacy of resilience echoing through time. So next time you shiver on a cold day, remember those before you, their struggles, triumphs, sorrow, and joy. Above all, remember the unbreakable human spirit that carried them through even the harshest winters. That perhaps is the greatest lesson from the medieval world. No matter how dark or cold, spring's promise always awaits. With that, dear listener, our journey through medieval Europe's brutal winters ends. I hope these tales of hardship and resilience offer new perspective on your own season. May you find warmth and comfort in family and community bonds, as our ancestors did. And may spring's promise light your way through cold nights. Thank you for joining me in this cozy corner of history. If you enjoyed our time, please subscribe and share with a friend. Many more fascinating tales await. For now, good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. As winter's brutal conditions tightened their icy grip on medieval society, even the privileged were not immune. Drafty, primitive castles ill-equipped for harsh months posed formidable challenges to royal households striving to stave off cold and keep the court provisioned. Maintaining a royal residence in winter required staggering logistics, massive firewood stockpiles to fuel roaring hearths, kitchen staff working ceaselessly to preserve meats, grains, and vegetables for lean months, and servants sealing every crack to keep out chill. Yet even diligent preparations often fell short. One chilling tale tells of Queen Elizabeth of Hungary, who reportedly perished from exposure in her palace in January 1326, a victim of the very castle meant to shelter her. Such grim fates show winter's deadly shadow over medieval life. Yet amid bleakness, the human spirit endured and rekindled hope. For many, that hope came in the feast of St. Stephen, a cherished midwinter celebration on December 26th. This day offered a brief respite from peasant drudgery, a rare sanctioned chance for revelry and indulgence. Central was a tradition of misrule, a commoner appointed lord of misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over merriment and issue playful edicts to superiors. This sanctioned license provided a vital pressure valve for tensions bred by feudal hierarchy. For one mirthful day, rigid social lines blurred and all feasted, gamed, and caroused as equals. The community bonds fostered by such celebrations were more than diversion. They were critical survival mechanisms amid winter's cruelty. A 1377 chronicle recounts two peasant families, neighbors whose winter stores were exhausted before spring, sharing their last resources on St. Stephen's feast. This generosity gave them strength to endure remaining winter's ravages. Such compassion formed medieval society's marrow in winter, a helping hand to a frostbitten traveler or extra firewood to a widow could mean life or death. Yet even warm fellowship cooled as winter's misery stretched on. St. Stephen's feast was a small flare of light before bleak January, February, and March. As stores dwindled and coal crept past stoked hearths, spring's promise seemed impossible. Still, year after year, medieval society endured, upheld by grit, fortitude, and fellowship forged in winter's crucible. One can imagine profound relief and joy at winter's passing. Softening air, lengthening daylight, hopeful icicles dripping. For tillers, no day was more welcome than Plow Monday, the agricultural year start, falling the first Monday after Epiphany. Though winter's rigors lingered, Plow Monday's ritual preparations offered hope, a tangible talisman assuring winter's loosening and spring's return. Picture furrowed fields emerging from snow, draft teams turning earth, medieval man dealing winter another blow, and proclaiming persistence against nature's caprice. We moderns, with central heat and electric blankets, can scarcely fathom the fortitude needed to endure medieval winters. If minor modern inconveniences seem daunting, consider the true suffering of our forebears. Their resilience and ability to find celebration amid privation seems superhuman. That they withstood winter's ravages and found light in darkness testifies to the indomitable spirit within us all, roused by hardship's call. So next time modern discontents chafe, recall medieval plights. Remember those before us, and tap your own reserves of grit and forbearance. As we nestle into warm beds, spare a thought for those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with will, fellowship, and hope. As the new year dawned and Plow Monday festivities faded, medieval life settled into winter's rhythm, short, frigid days and long, frosty nights. The fortunate retreated to smoky hovels and drafty manors. The less privileged faced constant elemental battles. One great hardship was sickness. Cramped, unsanitary conditions spread disease rapidly. The common cold left sufferers red-nosed and bleary-eyed, but worse illnesses stalked the populace. Influenza was fearsome, striking young and old with fever, chills, and aches. Without vaccines or treatments, outbreaks decimated communities. The winter of 1557 was brutal, with a virulent influenza strain killing over 10,000 in Paris alone. Pneumonia preyed on the weakened, filling lungs with fluid until victims drowned. Crowded homes bred rampant pneumonia, often killing multiple family members, leaving orphans and shattered lives. Even royalty was not spared. Disease spread rapidly in castles and courts due to constant visitors. Henry VIII lost wife Jane Seymour. The postnatal complications likely worsened by poor hygiene. Children were most vulnerable. Harsh weather, meager rations, and unsanitary conditions made winter dangerous. In 1500s London, half of children died before age 5. The custom of bone lace, tying a black ribbon to a seriously ill infant's hand to secure their burial shroud if they died, speaks to winter's deadly toll on the innocent. With dangers inside and out, winter was a time to batten down and pray. For the poor, even shelter, food, and warmth were scarce. Firewood was precious, with strict laws on gathering fallen timber. Peasants might huddle around fires of dried dung and straw, striving for feeble warmth. Shivering livestock shared scant heat, breath steaming in frigid air. Food dwindled to salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. Autumn's bounty was distant, spring's greenery months away. Foraging for hardy fare like nettles, garlic, and mushrooms was necessary. Winter vegetables were scarce, making dreary meals of pottage with peas, beans, salted pork, and foraged greens. Tasteless but sustaining, it kept body and soul until spring. Sometimes even this was unattainable. Storms, droughts, pests, and calamities obliterated food stores, plunging regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 was harrowing. Relentless rains rotted crops across northern Europe. Desperate people ate dogs, horses, even human flesh. Parents smothered starving children as mercy. Corpses littered streets and fields, too many for burial. Though remarkable in scale, localized crop failures and shortages were constant threats. Medieval winter diets balanced subsistence and starvation, a time of hunkering down, knowing things might worsen before improving. Winter affected all life facets. Leisure, worship, crime, and punishment bore its mark. The drudgery of cold colored all life aspects. Socially, winter was a time to draw inward, relying on family and community bonds. Cheerful Yule log gatherings gave way to sedate pursuits. With travel treacherous and daylight scarce, people sought amusement and enrichment indoors. Storytelling and singing whiled away hours. Flickering rushlights or tallow candles illuminated sewing, weaving, and whittling. Idle hands were seen as the devil's playground. Industriousness was necessity. Winter confinement provided time for gainful activities. Literate folk curled up with books, though literacy was rare. A tradesman's library might hold a Bible, a book of hours, and tales of Robin Hood. The wealthy owned lavish, illuminated volumes. Those who could read often did so aloud for household entertainment. Winter was for sharing stories of knights, tricksters, and lovers. King Arthur's chivalric adventures were perennial favorites, transporting listeners beyond winter's confines. Less wholesome entertainments livened winter days. Dice gambling was popular, often sparking tempers and empty purses. Knucklebones clattered and dice rattled in taverns and great halls as fortunes were won and lost. Drink was common. Ale, mead, and wine warmed bodies and spirits. Taverns bustled, offering fellowship, entertainment, and escape from cold. Inebriation loosened tongues and inhibitions, sparking debates, bawdy songs, and sometimes brawls. Winter's short dark days also lent themselves to reflection and spiritual contemplation. The church held great sway. Winter was for drawing closer to God, with farming at a low. More time was for prayer, penance, and good works. Nativity plays gave way to somber devotions. Some undertook pilgrimages to holy sites despite harsh conditions, showing commitment. Others spent hours in cold churches, fingering rosaries and meditating on souls. Charity was vital. Almsgiving was Christian duty. The 7 corporal acts of mercy: feeding hungry, giving drink, sheltering homeless, clothing naked, visiting prisoners, comforting sick, burying dead, guided generosity. In scarcity, small kindnesses made all the difference. Yet winter's harshness sometimes brought out the worst. Crime rose as desperation and opportunity increased. Closed quarters frayed tempers, spiking assaults and violence. Medieval justice was ill-equipped for seasonal surges. Trials delayed until weather improved, leaving accused in dank jails. Punishments were harsh: fines, floggings, executions. Still, the human spirit endured. People found small joys and levity. Spring's promise sustained them through darkest nights. February's lengthening days brought relief with St. Valentine's feast on the 14th. Once a pagan fertility rite, Christianized as love celebration, it was warmly embraced. Drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts was established by the 15th century. Eligible ladies and lads drew slips, sealing romantic fates for the year. Pairings led to flirtations and marriages. Flowers, sweets, and verses were tokens of affection. Receiving a handmade card could set hearts aflutter. Even in winter's chill, love's fires burned. After Valentine's feast, Lent's austerities intensified, but worse seemed behind. Snowdrops and crocuses poked through frost. Tangible signs winter weakened. Throughout the Middle Ages, seasons shaped all life, none more than winter. It was a time of privation and hardship, where survival was achievement, yet also a time of resilience and quiet fortitude. Medieval winter tested spirit, proving faith, family, and community values. Icicles, frosty meadows, and snow-covered fields may seem picturesque, but realities were harsh. This crucible forged a people of grit and endurance. The Middle Ages were built on backs that weathered winter's worst and still hoped for spring. No greater tribute exists to their stubborn vitality. So next time you grumble over a delayed train or slushy sidewalk, think of medieval ancestors. Without thermal socks, central heat, or weather apps, they faced winter battles with all they had, and won spring after spring. We inherit their tenacity and spirit. With that, I leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket. Secure that winter is largely tamed thanks to those before us. May your dreams be of gentle snowfalls and toasty hearts, and may you wake to a winter more friend than foe. As the weak winter sun struggled through gray clouds, medieval Europeans shivered, drawing cloaks tighter. The cold seemed to reach their bones. For poor peasants, ragged woolens that felt stifling in summer offered little warmth now. They huddled in hovels, grateful for smoky fires, breath misting in cold air. Animals suffered too. Elderly draft horses, ribs showing beneath shaggy coats, longed for summer grass. Milk cows stood loaded, chapped, and raw in drafty barns. Even barn cats looked less haughty, bellies gnawing and whiskers frosted. Winter was especially harsh for the lowest social rungs. Nobility, cocooned in drafty castles, were not immune. Blue-blooded maidens wailed as silk gowns failed against stone chill. Castle kitchens strained to provide hot delicacies. King Henry II of England, suffering winter shivers, once burned a chair just to warm his posterior briefly. Servants despaired, fearing his temper might ignite faster than the furniture if cold persisted. For all, winter dragged on interminably, an unrelenting slog of frozen misery. Only occasional celebrations or feast days offered respite. Brief islands of revelry in winter's dark ocean. People seized these moments, cherishing them like drowning men gasping for air. The most anticipated was St. Stephen's Feast on December 26th, a day of unbridled merriment and subversive reversals. By ancient tradition, a peasant was crowned Lord of Misrule, gleefully lording over betters in sanctioned rebellion. One can imagine raucous laughter as lowly as serfs mock-ordered local barons. For one glorious day, normal rules and hierarchies fell away. All reveled as equals. Winter's drudgery seemed to recede, driven back by communal joy's bright blaze. But soon festivities ended, misrule was writ, and